Hi, my name's Aaron and I'm a sex addict. This is my step 1 chair reading. For 30 years I have had compulsive behaviours around sex. For most of that time I couldn't see the harm it was causing me or others. Going back to the beginning, in my early childhood, I was part of a family with one older brother and one older sister. I was the youngest by 8 years. When I was around 7 or 8, my family situation changed a lot and as my sister got pregnant and married and moved out of home. My brother also left at the same time, joining one of the forces. And I became an only child. My mother and father seemed more frustrated with each other. My mother focused on me in terms of emotional support and looked to tell me everything. My mother and father never seemed to have lots of friends, and maybe my mother needed me to be her confidant. Around this time, my mother would often talk to me about leaving my father, which I found very frightening. And then when my father would return home, would act as if everything was normal and great. During this time, I was starting to learn to masturbate and would spend a lot of time figuring out this new sensation. I can remember using the home shopping catalogues as stimulation. I would often have time on my own after school as both parents worked. By the time I was 10, I was quite aware of masturbation, the pleasure it gave me and the overwhelming sensations it brought. I had also become fully aware of things such as pastry in the newspapers and how normal it seemed to appreciate these women as sexual objects. I can also remember seeing my first porn magazine through a friend who had snuck it out of their house to show off. Soon after, I can remember being quite obsessed about that sort of magazine and knew exactly where it was in the shops. At around the time of 12, I had one of my first moments of unmanageability when I explored using sex chat lines on the phones. I knew it was expensive, so couldn't be long on the phones, otherwise I'd be caught. But I called them lots of different times, and eventually the phone bill did arrive, and my parents were both angry about it. Initially, they seemed to focus on it just being a mistake and that they would have to look into it. The next day, I was walking with my mother down the high street, and she mentioned they were going to call the numbers and see what was going on. This filled me with fear, and I broke down and started sobbing and telling her it was me and don't call the numbers. I was in so much shame and so upset. I can remember my mother saying she would sort it out with my father, and that was the last I ever heard of it. In this moment, I had learned that I needed to be very secretive about this behaviour and avoid leaving evidence. Later, around 14, I used to do several paper rounds for the local newsagents. And quickly, the newsagents became fine with selling me adult magazines. It became a habit to get paid my wages on a Sunday and buy at least one magazine each week. It wasn't too long before my mother found my collection when she was cleaning, and I was told that as long as I kept it in the room, it was okay. I sort of remember asking why, expecting them to be angry and wanting me to stop. And my dad said that my brother and sister had put them through everything before, and that rules hadn't worked for them, so they would just let me get on with it. From that moment on, I was decorating my walls with softcore porn by cutting magazines up and sticking the pictures to the wall. It was completely normal to have these naked women on my wall. It was also in this time that I had my access to my first porn films. This would fill various blocks of time when I was on my own, still with my parents working after school and me being very isolated as I had few friends. I had very few boundaries in this part of my life compared to everything else such as school. I was very well behaved in general and had this incredibly private, secret, pleasurable world all to myself when I needed it. Later, at around 17, 18, a lot of this stopped as we moved to a new house and I started to work full time after finishing my studies. I also started my first relationship, which in hindsight I can see was not a good relationship, but it lasted 8 years with a lot of emotional and psychological abuse from my girlfriend and myself suffering from low self-esteem. I genuinely had no understanding that I should just end it, instead focusing on fixing or being better at making her happy, much like my mum had. During this time, the internet arrived. I started to cope with these uncomfortable feelings of not being good enough by using online porn. This was overwhelming to me. Suddenly I had access to new images, videos every day. This was another moment of unmanageability. With the internet arriving, I had a time where my girlfriend had to spend a short time in hospital. I had arranged the morning off to be able to collect her. She was to call me once the doctors had discharged her. I went on the internet as I woke to have a quick look at some porn. 2 hours later, I was still on it, blocking the phone line so she couldn't call me to tell me to get her. I disconnected unintentionally and the phone was ringing. It was my boss, saying my girlfriend had been trying to get hold of me and had called him. Of course, I lied about what had been going on, and to my girlfriend made some excuses about looking up her aftercare on the internet and rushed off to get her. There was a point halfway through the relationship that we split up. My self-worth plummeted even further. My sexual behaviours stepped up a level, and I had my first experience of joining some friends for sex, and it was like porn had become real, and I explored using prostitutes in this time. Shortly after this, I got back with my girlfriend and found myself going back to just watching porn. When we finally broke up the second time, it was a very complicated situation, with me still living in the house for several months whilst the relationship had already ended, and I found out about swinging websites and started to use them as a way to have no strings fun without needing to worry about upsetting my ex. Suddenly I was living porn as my reality. It was highly secretive, and I would meet people in the evenings or late at night and return home after. I eventually did move out of the house and quickly entered into a relationship with a young woman I met through swinging. Once again, at the time, I didn't see it, but this relationship was unhealthy and based out of a sexual addiction rather than an intimate love and relationship. We both stayed active in the swinging scene throughout, meeting as a couple, and I would spend many hours looking at the sites and watching porn. This relationship lasted about 4 years and then ended, which had almost no emotional impact on me, which when I reflected in the recent months, highlighted how this was more about acting out than being in a relationship. When it ended, I found my own place and recognised I had to address a few things. My needing to pick people that seemed to need rescuing, that I focused so much on my partner that I didn't really have any friends. However, I never saw an issue with my daily use of porn, my use of swinging, or engaging with prostitutes. When I moved, I started to create new friendships through work, started to grow my self-worth. At the same time, I still had porn. I also had a 6-month arrangement with a woman who was a friend with benefits without the need for the friendship. She would come and stay most weekends and be there just to meet my needs. As my self-worth grew, I started to lose the desire for this arrangement and saw it as something holding me back from a genuine relationship. I ended it quite bluntly. I then spent the next couple of years single, with some odd dates, but mostly focused on friendships. In this time I grew in confidence, self-worth and value, and had an active friend circle, interest in hobbies and a developing career. Porn, swinging and prostitution remained part of my life, but in a reduced faction. I was seeing prostitutes occasionally and would have a swinging encounter about every 6 months. Sex had really become a transaction, yet I really wanted something more. At the time that I considered to be my peak of self-worth, I met the woman that would become my wife. For the first 18 months of this relationship, everything was great. Then, when I proposed to her, I was rejected and my self-worth crashed. There was no intent or indication from her to end the relationship, and instead she said it was about the timing, the place, the ring, all being wrong. But that in maybe 6 months it would be right. I took this on and switched to my codependent thinking, rather than ending it and walking away for the bad treatment that was. I crashed into focusing on her and abandoning my friends and hobbies to ensure I was there for her whenever she needed it, to be ready for when she was ready. My porn usage became daily again, filling the hours in between me getting home and her arriving. After a while, this also started to fill the time in the morning when she would leave for work. My value was shot and my use of porn was deep. My resentment was growing, my self-worth was shrinking, and porn kept thoughts at bay. Eventually, I asked at the right time, in the right place, with the right ring, and my wife accepted. I should have been over the moon, but I found myself doubting my worth even more. Had she said yes to me because it was a great engagement story, rather than it was because of love? I also found her struggle with the concept of marriage and dealing with her parents, led to such negative language about marriage that I was constantly feeling that it was awful. Her comments would make me sick. In this time, I then acted out of the relationship and slept with a prostitute. Even now, I can't tell you how I got there and did that. I remember the disgust I felt the moment I was done. I basically ran away from that place. I tried to stop my use of porn and sex sites, and quickly failed after just a few days, and carried on looking at porn. I kept this secret for 3 years. We did get married. We moved house. I had lots of great changes and I was happy. For the first year after moving, we spent a lot of time enjoying our new friends and our new place to live. But then I found resentment growing. My wife started to spend 13 to 15 hours a day at work, arriving home exhausted. I would then be there to serve her dinner, then we would go to bed ready to get up and go to work the next day. For a while I seemed okay with this, but I know that my resentment started to grow as I started to feel more like a butler than a husband. Her exhaustion grew to the point that even the weekends would be seriously affected. We didn't have a life outside of our holidays, which had been an important part of our relationship. In the last year of the relationship, I found my resentment growing so much, my use of porn became completely automatic. I then started to message prostitutes for a bigger hit, risking everything for a thrill. I even found that when on holiday, I started to need to look at porn. I didn't need to masturbate or anything, but found myself looking. This did start a thought that something was really wrong, as before this point, holidays always been a really safe space. Me and her would be together. There would be no porn or thoughts of it, and we would just enjoy our time until this started to change. Eventually, my wife found these messages, confronted me with a direct question about how many prostitutes I slept with whilst we were together, and I told her. That was the beginning of the end of one of the most important things in my life. 6 months later, my wife started divorce proceedings, and we put our home on the market. 6 months after that, I am divorced. The house is sold, and my ex-wife has left the county, and I live in a 2-bedroom flat with a flatmate. Bizarrely, I feel happier now than I have been for quite a while. I have struggled to accept my powerless and unmanageability until a few months ago. Now that I have a better understanding of it and evidence moments of it, I have now been able to accept it. My use of sex chat lines, prostitution, swinging, and my main issue, using porn over 30 years, has shown that. Even more was how hard it was to stop. I have relapsed badly several times whilst in recovery. I can remember being sat in a car waiting for an address of where to meet someone for sex. Hearing the voice saying, "What are you doing? Go home. Get out of here." And the addict, the one that had made me drive for almost an hour without even knowing where I was truly going, just focused on playing the fantasy, promising me that it will be great and fix everything, unable to turn around. I remember the hollowness of it all, hearing both sides arguing whilst everything was happening, the horror within me after and the next day. The motivation stopped being so strong till a few days later, my addict started me thinking I should message them. It could be better next time. Eventually, I had a friend add restrictions to my phone and my iPad, and a fellow add restrictions to my laptop to choose what I could do once the compulsions came, and I knew they would. I had acute awareness of my addict and knew I would not always be able to stop it on my own. My journey in recovery has been longer than I imagined at the beginning, and I have struggled more than I can believe. But it takes time, and it needs to. There is no shortcut. If you work it, it works. After several months, featuring multiple relapses, pain, sadness, and emotional instability, I find myself feeling the beginnings of an inner peace and an understanding of myself that I've never experienced in my life. I am not perfect, but I don't need to be. My mind does wander to addictive thinking, but I have space to be able to stop the thought becoming action. My addict is now my friend, and it warns me when something isn't quite right, and gives me the ability to reflect on my circumstances. I've accepted my addict rather than try to beat it into non-existence and be cured. I have learned to listen to it and respond to it, and just not act on it. It sounds so simple, but it is harder to do than I ever imagined. Thank you.